Kevin Newman has had an impressive career in broadcast journalism. However, while he was busy building that career, he and his son Alex were growing apart. Then, when Alex told his father he was gay, it forced the two men to examine their relationship. It's all documented in a new book called All Out: A Father and Son Confront the Hard Truths That Made Them Better Men. And we welcome Alex Newman and Kevin Newman to TVO. It's okay, this is just freaky. I'm going to start right off the top by saying it's freaky. First of all, he's mini-me, right? He is so like it. Look how you two are sitting right now.
In many ways, yeah. All right, I'll do something different.
You look the same. I mean, I've known you since you were his age.
Yes, you have,
So
yeah.
the similarities are just crazy here. And the funny thing is, I'm talking to Alex Newman and Kevin Newman, but your first name isn't really Alex, and your first name isn't really Kevin.
That's true.
So should we get that established off the top? What's your first name?
It's John.
And what's his first name?
John. My grandfather was John.
Yes.
Irish immigrant who came to Toronto, and we have saddled each other with going by our middle names for the rest of our lives, which in the computer generation is just an annoyance.
Yes.
It is indeed. All right. I've known you a long time, but I don't know you that well, so I want to start with you.
Great.
What are your earliest memories of having a dad on TV?
Some of the earliest ones are of him in the television, and I was a little confused as to my father being trapped in this weird box in our living room. But the first real memory of my dad, and I say real because the television was always this barrier between us, was when it was in Edmonton, and he had come back from assignment, and he had brought me a gift, and it was a little toy car, little race car, and I remember him coming through the door, and I had this moment of, oh. There's this guy, it's his relative, it's dad, and but I didn't understand that he was my father. I didn't have the closeness with him that the other kids in the neighborhood did.
How old do you think you were at this point?
I was 3.
3 years old.
Mm-hmm.
You said the television was a barrier between the two of you. What does that mean?
In many senses, I mean, when I was a kid, it was the thing that kept him away, and it was the thing that sort of broke us apart. As I grew up, television was something that always kept Dad traveling. Doing amazing things, and having him sort of become a star and a superhero in my mind. But at the same time, I lacked a closeness.
At school, was it a cool thing to have a dad who was on TV?
To some of the teachers, yeah.
How about to your friends?
Not so much, and I think it was part of the recourse of my bullying. Being a part of it, where teachers would give me special attention, or they would say, "Oh my gosh, I love your father," and it actually became something that I wanted to hide from people that I met, just because it became such an overbearing topic in classrooms or with people I would first meet.
How much of any of this were you aware of as you were out there trying to build your career, traveling all over the place, doing your thing?
Almost none of it, to be honest. I mean, I was always aware of the distance and regretted it. I can't think of a time when, I wasn't in a cab or I wasn't in a plane and I'd look out the window and think, what am I doing? Like, I'm going away from my family so often. But this was a time in media when media had money, and there was a lot of travel, and you would go places a lot. And it was the job. And we were a single income family. My wife and I made the decision that if we could, she gave up her career in journalism to raise Alex and Erica. So, I didn't have much choice, really.
Because you felt, I got to be the provider.
Yeah, and I had to be the provider. That was sort of the agreement we had. And if you're lucky enough to be in that position, I mean, you're lucky enough to know that as you are looking out the airplane window, that there's, somebody with your child that you trust absolutely, so.
The home you came from, your folks split up at a certain point, eh?
They did at 14, yeah. I grew up in Mississauga, and my parents divorced at 14, and my mother went back to work at that point. She'd been an at-home mom as well. And
your wife also, her parents split up.
Yeah.
Okay,
we beat the odds so far.
Well, I was going to say, so the one thing that the two of you do know is that you want to be together and you want to stay together, and you don't want to have what happened to your parents happen to you.
Right.
So what, I'm not sure what the question here is, other than you basically did everything that you're not supposed to do to have a good marriage and have a good family life. And by that I mean, you're on planes and you're traveling and you're away all the time.
Yeah.
So how did that make any sense exactly?
Committed to each other as partners, committed to each other as friends. sometimes when we have these periods now where I'm at home more, sometimes we look at each other and we go, okay, that's how we stay together because we weren't together all the time. I don't know. Just a dedication. You know what, I think what it might have been was that when we found each other as a couple, that feeling that we lost through divorce, that feeling of being settled and family came back to us. And then when we had Alex, it was like that feeling that I remember as a child of feeling safe in the backseat of your parents' car again. And we didn't want to let it go easily.
You didn't have the kinds of difficulties establishing a relationship with your daughter, who's younger than Alex,
Right.
than you did with him. So what's the theory there?
I put way more expectations on my son than I did my daughter. I got to know my daughter as a person. I didn't do what I think many men do, particularly to their sons, is I didn't load onto her the expectations of, okay, Alex, I need your life to be better than mine. I need your life to, I need you to have lots of friends because I didn't. So all the expectations landed on Alex's shoulders. He was also the first child, and I think we think about it more as the first child.
He's a firstborn and he's a son, and therefore...
Right.
And did you feel the weight of those expectations growing up as his son?
I did. Yeah, I did. And I think it was part of one of the miscommunications throughout the book and throughout our story is that every move my dad would make to try and make me, I guess better in a sense, it's not really the right word, but if you were bullied as a kid, you tried to stop me from being bullied as a kid or have friends that are into sports. And so you would project onto me, hey, maybe you should try sports. But I interpreted it as, Dad doesn't get me. Like, I don't like sports. How many times have I said this to him? And yet he keeps enrolling me in all these sports activities. So from his point of view, he's trying to help me. From my point of view, he doesn't get me.
I do have to say, I love the book, incidentally. It is a lovely book. You two have done a very nice job on it. And we should just explain that you write a chapter, it goes back and forth. And what's fascinating about it is when you talk about the same events, completely different interpretation of those events. Mm-hmm. How did you two get so offside from each other, in your view? I know his view. What's your view of how you two got so disconnected over the years?
I mean, I think it was that lack of closeness that I had with my mother. I was really close to my mom. She was there all the time, and she was sort of my backbone, my support. And when it came to Dad, I didn't quite understand that Dad had any weaknesses or any failings. So when I get a bad grade, when I need help in school, or when I was bullied, I had no channel to communicate that with him. So I would just bottle it up. It would be almost shameful. So I think that was the beginning of this divide that grew between us and the sort of silence that existed. And I didn't really understand the full extent to it until, to be honest, we finished writing the book. I thought I knew the right side of the story. And as I was writing, I kept that point of view intact. But then once we exchanged the manuscripts and I was able to see what was behind the scenes of Kevin Newman, which is a little bit weird because I'm his son and you'd think I'd know that, I learned a whole new guy.
Well, let's do one, perhaps the best example in the book of how the two of you were disconnected was the whole Good Morning America thing. Now, I got to tell you, from a guy sitting in this chair who's worked his whole professional life in Southern Ontario, you hit the mother load. I mean, people like me were very proud of the fact that you got that gig. And now I'm reading the book, and the whole thing, almost from the get-go, is a disaster. Mm-hmm. Why didn't it work in your view?
I wasn't ready for that level, frankly. I didn't know myself well enough. I didn't know what to stand up for or to. And so that's the stuff I'll take. It's never one answer, right? And at that point, there was also the issue, they had put someone in charge of it that had never been a programmer. They put a marketer in charge of the program. So he didn't know how to tinker with a show. He didn't know how to bring out a talent. He knew how to focus group it and suggest, get rid of the glasses, change your hair, that'll fix everything.
What did they do to your eyebrows?
I did it to my eyebrows. I got to take that on too. The suggestion was that because behind my glasses you can't see my eyes very well, that one of the things I should attempt to do is punch out my eyes. So they suggested I go dye my eyelashes. And at that point, I mean, now I would go really, you think that's the problem? But I wasn't even 40, and I was unsure and I was insecure. So I'd never dye my eyelashes. I saw the place around the corner that somebody came on and put it on my eyelashes, and it was way too heavy, and I looked like a drag queen, and I was ashamed, right? But it was my breaking point. It was at that point that I thought, they just don't know what to do themselves to fix this.
But the amazing thing about hearing you describe the events of that time is that it sounds like there's almost no journalism involved in that job, and it's all, you know, focus groups and showbiz and be more like Matt Lauer and
Yeah.
and I mean, I know you're a journalist.
Yeah.
So how do you? I mean,
Well, that was the misfit, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the show, all shows, sort of morning shows, they go back and forth. You do need some journalistic chops because you do interview the Secretary of State of the United States occasionally. So that's why I was brought in, because I did have that gravitas. But then the producers of the show at the time didn't require that. They were going much softer. And so my strength didn't really get played to. And I had to learn a set of skills that I'm not particularly comfortable with. I'm not great at a dinner party. I can interject, I can interview, but I'm not much fun at a dinner party. You need to be fun at a dinner party to do morning television.
now here's where the two of you again were very disconnected, because of course all over the tabloids is your rise and fall on that program, which lasted what? How long was it?
8 months. I was on as co-host. Yeah.
Of Good Morning America, and you don't know anything about this.
I don't. I actually had a bullying incident that told me. I had a bully come up to me and he said, "Oh, I heard your dad got fired." And I thought he was just razzing me at school, and he said, "Oh, well, now you're going to get deported." And so I thought, you know, it was just some, like, you know, he's just pulling on my Canadian string and whatever, you know, I'll just ignore it. But he was right. Which
Alex, see, this is one of the things that I learned in the book. I didn't know that Alex didn't know until we actually moved home to Vancouver.
Yeah.
And that was like months later. But one of the things I think I did, and maybe some fathers do, is you don't burden your children with this stuff. That's the way I was brought up, right? You're heroic. You don't, like, if you have adult worries, you shield your children from it. But I mean, you know, you were in high school at that time, and I was still acting as if, you know, I needed to protect my children from, you know, what was actually going on.
But the fact is, you left that job and you went to Nightline, and you worked on Peter Jennings's World News Tonight as well. So you could easily be forgiven for thinking, my dad didn't get fired. In fact, he might have got promoted. He's working on a better show now.
And that was my perception growing up, that dad was always moving on to something better. So I never knew that half of your jobs were
Rescue
firings.
operations.
Yeah.
Now, during the course of all of this, so you're traveling all over the place. You're up here, you're down in New York, then you come back. Eventually, you set up the new evening newscast at Global Television. Do you have any inkling at all about your son's sexual orientation?
No. The only time I had an inkling was when he was 17. It was a few months before he came out. And we had grown apart. Alex had grown distant. Not unusual for teenage boys to lock themselves in their rooms and not communicate. So one of the things I thought is, okay, I'm going to make an effort here. I've got the time, I've got the resources. So we went to Japan together. Alex was taking Japanese. He was very interested in anime. I thought, okay, let's put something together that's his passions, and I'll be the student, you be the teacher. And so we went to Japan, and we were in Nara there for a day, and you know, probably finally got sick of each other and said, let's just go off and do our own thing. Well, Alex didn't know at the time, but I was spying on him just to make sure he was safe, because
Always a journalist.
or a dad, I don't know what it is.
Because you're
Probably.
how old at the time? You're 17 or so?
17,
Yeah,
yeah.
17.
Okay.
So I noticed that the Japanese girls, he was a head turner. And I also noticed that he didn't turn his head. There was no recognition of what was happening, and you didn't notice. So that's the first time and the only time that I thought, wonder.
Your side of the story.
It took a while. It took a long time, and I wish it was an answer that I could have come up with myself. And I remember there was a summer before I came out where I was just tortured with this notion of I don't feel normal. Something's off, and I don't know who I am. But I didn't have the answer at the time. I had to find it from outside of myself. I had to actually experience what it was like to be with a guy to understand that that's what I liked. I had a girlfriend at the time. She was really patient with me. And there were little hints along the way.
Well,
so
you call her girlfriend, but you guys didn't kiss. You didn't.
we did. We kissed. I'll leave it at that. And but it was every night if we go out on a date, when I drop her off at her house, there was always this moment of, oh, now I got to kiss her in the car. Oh, what am I going to do? And I kind of get it finished with quickly and sort of boot her out the car, and that was it. And I feel bad for her to this day, because I mean, she must have thought I didn't like her or something, but it wasn't about her personality. It was just the whole sex.
Did you ever circle back with her and say, it wasn't you, it was me?
Yeah, and that's a conversation we had at the time when I broke up with her, and I actually ended up sending her a copy of the book, and we've had some email exchanges back and forth. And,
Ah, nice.
you know, it's really, we have a good relationship.
How much of your trying to come out was problematic because I'm Kevin Newman's son, and I don't know how to tell Kevin Newman about all of this.
That's a great way to put it, because that dad was this entity in my life that I didn't know, well, first off, how to communicate failure to him. So there's right out of the gate, every kid deals with failure, but if you can't communicate it to your dad, there's a big barrier there.
I'm going to stop you there. Why would coming out constitute a failure in your eyes?
At the time, I was really naked, and I was afraid that Dad would see my coming out as a failure. Not that it was a failure of my own personality, that he might not accept me, that he might not accept gay lifestyle, boyfriends, and I feared that I would be cast away. I feared that Dad would prioritize his career, and I would be a blemish on the family.
Did he give you any reason to feel that way?
Not individually, not as a person, but there were moments as I was growing up that I saw his disapproval of sort of gay culture in general. So for instance, we'd be watching a TV show and two guys would be holding hands and he'd be like, oh no, I can't watch that. And he would change the channel. And it was little things that I caught as a child that even though I didn't know I was gay, I was searching for approval or disapproval from both of my parents along that timeline. So I had all of this knowledge that, okay, Dad doesn't really approve of this. I don't know where he stands on the topic. So when I come out to him, I have to understand the risk that he might see this as a negative, and I might lose that unconditional love that I've always had in my family.
So that's the backstory that you presumably at the time did not know. Mm-hmm. From your point of view, did he have any reason to fear coming out to you?
No, I mean, I have gay friends. I've worked alongside gay men and women in my business. I think the thing that hurts the most when I read it was that my own son didn't believe that my love for him was unconditional, that he believed it was conditional. So that's an enormous failure on my part, that I wasn't able to communicate that to him and that he didn't believe it. And he's right. There were times when I watched television and I would get uncomfortable and just wasn't there. And so over time, what I've come to realize is that, I found it very easy to accept Alex and defend him to the world. But when Alex would, reach out to me and invite me to some gay clubs for celebrations and things, I was always very subtly aware that, or maybe not so subtly aware, that I was in a gay club, and these were gay men in a gay club. And they weren't like, firefighters, they weren't, office guys, they were gay guys at a gay club. Mm. And that to me is homophobia. That's still homophobia because I'm just not completely accepting and embracing of the culture. And so, I think that was my journey that began that day.
You, after dinner one night, call a family conference. And this is the moment when you're going to tell everybody, and you're finally going to make this official. Mm-hmm. How did you negotiate within your own head how to do all that?
Well, by that point in time, I had pretty much figured out who I was. I had an answer, and I was very aware that my family needed to know about it. And I had two choices at that time. I was about to go away to college in Ontario. We were living in BC at the time. So I was thinking, okay, I could either wait till I'm far away and drop the bomb and just hope everything's all right, or I can tell them before I go away and try to see how the family reacts.
Would have been easier to do it later, right?
It would have been
easier to send them an email or just say.
Would have been easy, yeah, just a text message.
So
by the way,
why didn't you do that?
Because they deserve to know the real me. They deserve to know who I really was and who I discovered myself to be. And I owed it to my family to do that. And I owed it to myself to get them to know me. So yeah, it was Thanksgiving, Canadian Thanksgiving, where I called the family meeting after dinner, and usually that's a pretty foreboding thing to do. It's never really good news. It's usually we're moving or mom's not well or something of that nature. So I know you were nervous. Mom was nervous. Erica, my sister, she already knew. I told her in the car on the way home, picking her up from school, and she didn't know what to do with me because I was just a sobbing mess beside her, and I don't think she's ever seen me cry before. And then we sat down, and I struggled to get the 3 words out that would basically change how my parents saw me forever, and that is that I am gay.
I'm going to read an excerpt, Alex, because you didn't struggle to get the words out. It was way beyond that. Here we go. From All Out. A wail came from deep inside him. This is Kevin describing his son. A primal and barely human sound I've only heard once before in a refugee camp in Kosovo. You'd hear it late at night, this wave of sorrow and loss passing from one tent to the next. Hearing that same sound coming from my child was terrible, and I lunged toward him, hugging him tighter than I ever had. Kevin, I can only imagine what that moment was like for you. How did you handle watching your son fall apart like that?
I was terrified. I mean, at that point, I didn't know what he wanted to tell us, for sure. But he was so vulnerable, so frightened. It was interesting because it was almost like a physical thing inside of him that I knew something massive was about to come out of him, and I just went into protection mode.
You hugged him like you've never hugged him before.
Yeah, I wouldn't let him go because he was struggling.
He wanted to get away from you.
Yeah, no, he was struggling. He was angry, and I remember thinking to myself, if I let go at this moment, what will that mean? Like, how will he interpret it? Will he mean that I'll let you go? Or so what I said in my own mind, and I remember thinking this very clearly, is don't let go. He has to feel this. He's resisting it, but he has to feel it.
And as he was doing that, what was going through your head?
I was thinking, I know my dad has the ability to, work in television, and he has a very on personality, and I wasn't sure if Dad was just saying the right thing at the time, just to make sure I don't completely collapse or astray from the family. So I wasn't sure if he was being honest.
You felt I was bullying you almost.
Almost.
Yeah.
You doubted his sincerity.
I did.
So the hug for you was not a sincere gesture to connect with you.
It didn't seem to be at the time. And I mean, looking in hindsight, of course he accepted me as his son, but would he accept my partners? Would he accept the culture that I'm, going to be in? I wasn't sure at the time, and I wasn't sure what he knew.
In fairness, you pushed a bit there, eh?
I did.
Like a lot of public displays of affection and very,
I did.
Now, did you do that to sort of get under his skin a bit? Was that part of the agenda there?
I did it to test him, and the tests were unfortunately unfair. And I think as every adolescent goes through a phase of discovering themselves, they test their parents. And I put up walls and barriers that Dad could never overcome. For instance, making out with my boyfriend in front of him. I mean, I don't care like if you're gay, straight, bi, kids making out in front of their parents, and to the degree that I was
Parents don't
just
wanna see
inappropriate.
that.
Exactly. So, but I had him at a point where he couldn't say stop because it would have legitimized my suspicions of his approval.
You had to prove you were not homophobic by letting him carry on like that in front of you.
Yes. And my wife and I had like very frank conversations about this. I mean, if you fear that, I mean, your child is going to have sex, and if your child is gay, you want to make sure that they're in the safest place possible for that. So our children were in the bedroom in our house a lot sooner than I had thought they would be, but that's one of the things you do. I mean, you have to adjust.
Let's bring this, can we please, this photo up? Look over the monitor over my shoulder here. Okay, what's going on in this picture?
There's a lot going on in that picture. That's the day after I came out. Dad had set up a family photo shoot, and he didn't cancel it. We debated it. We actually sat down and talked about this after I came out, and you said, "Do you want me to not do this?" And I'm glad we went ahead because it captures this moment in time where I can see my face and I know I'm forcing a smile, but for some reason I don't know how the photographer captured it. In every shot, there's kind of this loneliness to me. There's like you see Mom and Erica around Dad, and I'm kind of recessed, and I don't know if maybe that was just in my own head, but it's quite telling.
It is interesting that he's sort of at the back.
And this, at the side.
Now, it's possible that that's just the way it worked out. It's also possible to infer that he's somehow being marginalized here.
Yeah, I remember that photo shoot that day. And I mean, sometimes people are marginalized, they self-marginalize too. Mm-hmm. And I think there was some of that going on. It was an awkward situation. Alex had just said the most private thing in his life, and here was a photographer with a camera. So, I'm not sure I wouldn't have I mean, I shrank back a bit too. I mean, I felt exposed, but we also felt that to not go ahead after such important news would send the wrong signal that, you know, we are still a family. You are still my son. We will still hold together. But that picture ended up telling, you know, probably the subtext of that day anyway.
Here's another excerpt from the book. Bear hugging Alex on that Thanksgiving Day in 2004, I had no idea how much I would have to evolve in order to become the father I wanted to be to both my children. I thought my acceptance of Alex at that moment was all that mattered, but I'd underestimated the distance between us or the ways he felt I'd failed him in the years leading up to that moment. Evolve, that's an interesting choice of word there. What are you trying to say by using the word evolve?
That point in our relationship was the point where the power between us changed. I think a lot of men as fathers sort of hang on to, I'm top dog. You will, you know, continue to respect my values, respect my will, respect my rules. Alex, as a man, said, rules have changed. You now have to get to know me. You now have to pass my tests. And I think in any relationship with a parent and child, sometimes you leave that realization too late. That you know, it is their world now. Alex, because he was you know, came out at a young age. I think we reached that point earlier. But I had a very clear indication. This is, you know, this is why I respect him as a man too. He threw the gauntlet down and he said, "Yeah, I want you in my life, but the rules are mine now."
How would you rate his evolution?
Oh, Titanic. I mean, it took like it took a long time, and there were little steps along the way where I saw him make progress. One of the instances was walking down Church Street in Toronto, and these two guys walk by holding hands, and you pause after they pass, and you said, "Oh my gosh, I didn't care," and it was this beautiful, like it was a small revelation, but it was so beautiful that Kevin of the past would have noticed and sort of felt either uncomfortable or
Probably wouldn't have said anything.
Probably wouldn't have said anything, but the fact that you recognized that you had made progress, and that was ages ago, that was years ago, but you know, up until now, like he's a different man.
He didn't flinch.
No, I mean now he's come out as a true self in this book, and I think it's amazing.
Now, when you say he's come out, do you mean in the way that you've come out, or are we talking about a different come out?
Well, I mean, everybody associates coming out with LGBT, but I think it's a broader topic. I think coming out is being truthful to who you are, and in this book, my dad has come out.
Interesting. He wrote about you in this book, "I don't know anyone, straight or gay, who's as close to his father as I am to mine."
Yeah,
like
slave.
you do know that
Yeah.
that's as good as it gets if you're a parent, eh? You know
Unbelievable. And the process of reading that line. I mean, Alex and I had exchanged our manuscripts, and he left the last chapter, which this is where that's from. And he came over to our house, and he said, "I actually want to watch you guys read this chapter." And so my wife and I sat there, and I got to the very end, and it was like, wow, yeah, it's huge. It really is huge.
Kevin, you do also talk about this near the end of the book, and that is journalists are never supposed to be the story. And you are very much the story here. And I wonder whether, despite all the good this book will do, and it will do a lot of good, this is going to open a lot of people's eyes, any qualms about putting the spotlight on yourself in this way?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm very comfortable shining the spotlight on others. And you know, there's a legitimate discussion in journalism about whether someone in my position should be declaring themselves on the issue of same-sex rights. So you know, when in the process of writing the book, I went to my news executives and I said, this is something I want to do. Are you comfortable with it? They were completely supportive. But then I read a book, David Brinkley's biography of Walter Cronkite. And in there, and I didn't go looking for this, I was just enjoying the book, but the entire team at CBS News during the civil rights movement reached that same point where they said, no, this isn't a question of balance, this is a question of human rights. And they made a very conscious effort, and it caused them, some of their affiliates, to drop out of the CBS network. But they made a very conscious effort to say, no, we are actually going to approach this story from the point of view of advocacy. And when I read that about Walter Cronkite and the greats of journalism, I found tremendous comfort, because I feel the same way about this issue, that there's no way you can explain to me that my daughter has more rights in this society than my son does.
Let's end up with this. What would you like people to take away from reading this book?
There's a lot to take away from this book, and I know our crisis in our family focuses on the LGBT aspect of my life, but I think that I'd love parents and kids to take away from this that be open to conversation. If every kid's going to go through a growth period, they try to understand, who they are, and if you stay open as a parent, if you're there and you're open to whatever they have to say to you, then it's gonna be a lot smoother. It's gonna be a lot smoother.
I love a book with a happy ending. Congratulations, you two. It's a lovely story, well told.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming into TVO tonight.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.